Hi, everyone. I'm here tonight with Nathan Ormond, and he's going to be talking with us about his experience in life and his perspective. And so, most of you know, if you watch this channel, I'm very passionate about listening to other people's perspectives, so passionate that I wrote a book about it. So, if you haven't read this yet, get my book on Amazon. It's Bridges of Love and Understanding. And it really, I share my experiences mostly with Muslims, talking with Muslims. And so tonight, we're going to be talking with Nathan, and he is not a Christian, he's an agnostic. And so, Nathan, we're getting a lot of noise. Is there anything we can do about that?
I was just trying to share the link around and copy and pasting. Was it typing noise
cool.
or other kind of noise?
Well, there's like sirens and things like that going on, which you probably can't control.
Yeah, the siren was probably outside, but I can mute myself when I'm not talking, and then that might make things better. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. Thanks. And so anyway, Nathan has a YouTube channel. It's called Digital Gnosis. And so I just want to start out by just asking Nathan, can you tell us a little bit about your channel?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my channel doesn't have a particular purpose. You know, like you might be able to say, oh, well, that's like a crafts YouTube channel, or that's like a woodworking one. This person does like art restorations. This person does like apologetics or something. Mine isn't particularly like that. I just kind of have a YouTube channel, and I've called it Digital Gnosis and put a bit of a brand on it because I thought that would like unify things I do, but it doesn't have a specific purpose. So like I've got interviews with philosophers, theologians, and just generally like scientists. I've got one with a mathematician called Gilbert Strang, who does the MIT open course linear algebra courses. Like he's quite famous for that, and a textbook. So I just generally like interviews along those lines. Then I also have like open conversations where I just hang out with people, talk about anything in general. I've done a couple, we've done one series so far with about 13 episodes on bad apologetics. So we look at some of the kind of like main arguments and the main ways that me and James Fodor, who's my friend, we look at some of the main ways we feel like philosophy is kind of being misused as like a marketing tool and abused to kind of overstate the case for Christianity. Not that there's no case to be made, but just like areas where we feel like it's being misapplied. And I'm trying to think what else I've got. Like, there's a few videos on there of me doing like Brazilian jiu-jitsu stuff, which is a sport I'm into. I just got kind of crowdfunded by my audience to get a camera so I can go out and do street epistemology interviews with people in the street, which I'm looking forward to doing. And I mean, that's about it, but there could be anything weird coming up in future. You know, like if I'll decide I want to start doing crafts or something, and you'll see some of those on there.
Oh, wow. Cool. Yeah. So that's Digital Gnosis, guys. And you can find the link in the description. And I just want to say, I love the channel because I go on there and, he does like 5-hour long live streams, and, he's got like 5 friends on there, and they just, talk for hours just about a variety of topics. And so, they just talk about philosophy, they talk about life, and it's a lot of fun. So, okay. So what are your beliefs, Nathan, about our existence?
Yeah, I mean, I guess philosophy in general is an attempt to grapple with like the most fundamental questions, the biggest questions, like like why are we here? What's the purpose of life? Where did we come from? Where are we going? And I think you'll often even hear a lot of Christian apologists sort of phrase it like that. They'll say, like these are the biggest questions of life. Where did we come from? Where are we going? And Christianity, I suppose, is one worldview which sort of has answers to all those questions. I myself wouldn't classify myself as a Christian in like a realist sense, that I'm not holding to those particular stories about our past or about metaphysically the way reality is, but I'm also not holding to like I suppose an in principle atheism or something like that story couldn't be true, or Christianity couldn't be true, or anything like that. Like, you might be familiar, some of the people who watch might be familiar with like Matt Dillahunty, or maybe like Aaron Ra, or that kind of brand of atheism. And I suppose that's not where I'm coming from either. I guess my own personal like worldview, if you were to call it that, is just an attempt to sort of impose an intellectual structure on my experience of reality, which is comprised of things that happen moment by moment, my history, that all the things that I've learned and been taught and stuff like that. And so I tend to sort of lean towards a kind of naturalism. Like, it seems to me like causal reality is natural, for example. Like, I don't think that there are things like demons or ghosts, or gods with a little g that sort of interact in the world. And it seems to me like there's kind of like natural states of affairs, and one sort of leads to the next. I think that the sciences are really powerful tools for investigating the way reality is like that. And then we use sort of philosophy informed by the sciences to construct our world on top of that. I also think there's a place for religion in my worldview, but it wouldn't be like a realist kind of religion, which is about a God out there. It would be a private kind of religion, maybe like something that's called non-cognitivism, to use the jargon of philosophy, which is more of like a personal expression of faith. And I think that something like that could even be pertinent to my life, where I guess I enjoy like a religious service in the same way that someone might enjoy a poem, for example, something like that. Or I enjoy reading the Bible in the same sense, and the story of Jesus. And then I guess, yeah, I'm open in principle to being wrong about pretty much everything. That's quite important to my worldview, like not being dogmatic, not tentatively holding to these beliefs, and also really engaging in trying to figure these things out as best I can, and keeping an open mind. So that and then my morality and ethics, I suppose, is mostly about trying to develop that kind of virtuous character in myself, in the other people that are in the community around me. It's not to say that I always do that, but that's what I'm kind of aiming for. So yeah, I guess in broad strokes that kind of answers the question. So what are my views ultimately, I guess, about reality and why we're here and stuff? I think that starts to fill in that picture at least.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And so some of the virtues you're saying that you want to like develop in the community is like thinking about things, and like being willing to be wrong and not be dogmatic. And what other kind of virtues?
Yeah, I mean, I'd even say trying to love others, trying to treat people like you'd want to be treated, for example. Those would be considerations that I think are really important. I guess one sort of intuition pump to think about this is like, you can kind of think of your ideal self, or you can think of like an ideal friend or something like that. How would you want them to be? And then you can kind of assess how they would react in certain situations, and the kind of character that they'd have. And then you can sort of hold a mirror up to yourself and say, well, in what ways am I doing that? In what ways am I not? So, I mean, a lot of these are to do with ideas, I guess, because predominantly that's how I'm engaging with the world. Like, I'm interested in ideas, I'm interested in philosophy, but I guess it would also carry on to like, if my neighbors are having a problem or something, rather than being the kind of person that goes, oh, well, screw them, they're in a different flat or something. Like, I'd actually be thinking, well, like, they're humans like me. I'm sure they've had stress at work and stuff. I would really like it in this situation if someone sort of like came and helped me out with my bins when I'm confused, or with whatever it is that I'm confused, whatever it is that I'm having difficulty with. And so I want to try and be that kind of person for them. So that's those are the sorts of virtues, I guess. And I think it stems out also to like finances, like how you'd kind of like manage your own personal finances or company finances and things like that. Like, are you the type of person who thinks it's important to put loads of money in having a Lamborghini, and or like if you've got a business or whatever, in doing like advertising for something that'll just make you a bunch of money? Or do you think it's more important to put that money in something that's going to like help people with education who don't have access to education or something? Like, what's more important to you? I'd rather be the kind of person that I think in America, is it Carnegie, who was a big industrialist who put a lot of his money into like public projects and libraries and things. And I think like that's the kind of person I'd rather be. For, not that I have that kind of money, but it's developing these virtues to be the kind of person in the world that deals with situations in those ways. I mean, I wouldn't like when people talk about virtue ethics, there's like rigid formulations that people have put out there, like the doctrine of the mean. You don't want to go to one excess one way or the other, and I don't think I'd hold to anything like that. I think it's more of a wishy-washy vague thing, and that's sort of how my ethics work.
Cool, thanks for sharing. Okay, so something you mentioned when you were talking about what your beliefs are tending toward at this time is like the view that there is really, we're dealing with natural things, and there's no such thing as ghosts and spirits and these types of things. So where did that idea come from? Do you think, is that based mostly on your experience, or like is it like because of something that you've studied? Like where did that idea develop?
I think it's based on my experience, but not in the sense of just like I've never experienced a ghost or something like that, which I don't think I have. But I mean my experience in the broadest sense. So even it's like I'm getting shone on by the sun reflecting on a building over there. So my experience in the broadest sense, like even including everything that I've been taught about psychology, the way that human brains work, the way that physics works. So I'd say that my beliefs about there not being, for example, people who are committed to there being demons that exist, which will tell you a certain story about how they can possess people and stuff like that, for example. And I have quite fundamental questions about how that can actually work with our best understanding of physics, like what's supposed to happen there, how do they displace the person's personality out of their brain. All the examples I've come across seem to be either they can be explained in natural terms. So it might seem like there's someone who has like seizures or something, and in a more primitive culture that's been categorized as something demonic. Or even people with particular kinds of tumors or brain damage, like the famous kind of case of Phineas Gage, who was a railroad worker with a spike in America. And I think he was like he'd put that spike into like to pack the dynamite as they were kind of laying the railroad, and something went wrong one time. He was packing the dynamite and it exploded and shot the spike up through his orbitofrontal cortex, and he survived crazily. And at first they thought, well, he can still think, this is really weird. And then it turned out that his behaviors kind of radically changed, like his planning about the future. I think he was kind of like more aggressive. He got involved in like dodgy business schemes and sort of was frivolous with his money and stuff. And it seems like in an earlier culture, perhaps people might have, I mean, this is speculation on my part in this particular case, but an earlier culture could have sort of imposed on that. Well, obviously, a demonic entity came in whereas now we seem to have a better explanation that sort of informs us about what's going on there in reality. It makes some predictions about the future, such as, if you remove this part of someone's brain, their behavior will change in this way. And so things like ghosts and demons just don't, it's not an argument that in principle they couldn't exist. There's no need for them in my worldview. Like it can all be explained in terms of natural states of affairs. And even there's important parts of physics, like the causal closure of physics, or like the conservation of energy, for example. And if we're to postulate these kinds of things, we're going to have to talk about how our best physics is actually wrong. Like, how is it that actually energy isn't conserved? New energy can come in from the supernatural realm, for example. And we're going to have to actually like the person who's offering the supernatural explanation is going to have to start to flesh out some of those things in order to sort of deal with this web of background beliefs I have about the way reality is to convince me of that position.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, well, when you encounter someone like me, that's just, like I've had many experiences with demons, both just experiencing things that they do, even moving objects, and just too many experiences to even like really recount. So do you chalk that up to me being like crazy? Or
No,
do you
I don't think you're crazy.
what do you do with that? Because for example, just, in my like area of Christianity, the kind of type of Christian I am, we do things like we have classes on casting out demons and stuff. So I've taken classes on this to be able to help people. And, this is something that I practice. So what do you do with that? Like,
yeah. So I don't think you've come to those beliefs because you're crazy. Like, I think probably given your environment and context and background beliefs, it probably makes a lot of sense that you believe that. But I think that what's at play in these situations is kind of like a mixture of things. Like there's a lot of research on like cognitive biases and reasoning heuristics that we use to kind of like make sense of situations, pareidolia, like agency detection, the sort of way that I suppose I should say our psychology works, because there's some attempts in neuroscience to offer like reductions of these things, but they're not completely they're not complete yet. So I think in terms of like the psychology of these cognitive biases, the psychology of like pareidolia, like I mean, I don't know where you stand on this, but people like seeing like Jesus in toast, for example, right? And it's more of like a pattern recognition thing. I mean, you could say that. So maybe I could take it off that and turn it into like when people take psychedelics, there's an area of the brain called the cingulate cortex, and that area is to do with like we're sort of like trying to figure out if there's like faces, for example, in images all around us all the time. And in fMRI scanners, when people take psychedelics, show that area of the brain is less active, and when that's less active, people begin to detect more like faces and in like wood grain patterns and things like that. So there's kind of like a story to be told there naturally about why it is that you'd be able to have these kind of experiences at all. And then the question is about like background beliefs and stuff, because they're going to inform the way that we come to interpret new experiences as well. So I guess if for example, someone is a Christian theist or a Muslim, they're going to be committed to demons or something existing as like a background belief anyway, even if they've had no experiences. But that's going to be a pretty like plausible candidate explanation for an experience. There's also a bunch of other like phenomena that might go on, like if you have an experience that you're unsure of, you might discuss it with a group of people, and over time, as you kind of make sense of it, you might offer explanations, and then you start to go, oh yeah, this was that, and stuff like the research into like memory biases and things over time. And I would say that there's probably some combination of these things going on in your case, that if I were privy to all those facts, I could like tell you that natural story. But I don't. I could also be wrong, right? It could be the case that if, in all these experiences that you'd had, I was there with, sitting behind a perspex window, like a one-way mirror window looking into something, I'd go, oh, that actually was a demon or something. And I'd be completely wrong. But from where I'm sitting with the set of experiences I have and what I know about psychology and stuff, that seems to be the best explanation of, a person coming to me and saying, like, I've experienced demons and stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So does that also extend to like when you're talking about a human being, do you believe that there is something going on beyond the material, like, but beyond the the material, the brain? Like, do you believe that there is a spiritual aspect or a soul aspect? And by the way, I heard you guys talking about this, in your live stream. You guys are kind of talking about, soul and everything, but I didn't really hear your perspective when you were having that conversation. Right. So,
yeah, I mean, I think I definitely don't have a full story to tell about what's going on there naturally, right? So in principle, again, I'm going to say I'm open to, for example, something like Cartesian or Platonic souls existing, right, in principle, or maybe even like Aristotelian souls, which is more like like a pure intellect, and the soul is like in the whole person or something, and you've got to get into a whole bunch of metaphysics to talk about what that means. But I mean, in principle, I'm open to those things being the case, but I don't think currently that I have good enough reasons to firmly put my foot in any of these camps. So like all of these other stories, for example, it seems really difficult to get them to fit with our current what neuroscience tells us about what the brain does. And it's not that that offers a complete explanation, but it's just that is telling us that there's something going on in the brain that's really, really crucial or correlates really tightly to this stuff. And so I think we've got to hold out a bit further to see what the neuroscience is going to tell us over the next 100 or so years. It's very difficult to say what would be that stopping point where I'd say, right, time for us to kind of go back to the metaphysics or something like this. But yeah, it seems to me like most of the progress is being made in that realm, and also in by naturalist philosophers and philosophy of mind at the moment. And maybe in future we'd get to the point where there was like a bit of halt in progress in that, and because that seems to be chipping away at explaining, like how does memory work, why do we have emotions? It's filling in that picture in a way that 2000 prior years of Aristotelianism and Platonism and Cartesianism sort of haven't. And so maybe there's a room for more of that in future, informed by the neuroscience. But I think at this current time, as someone who doesn't have a complete explanation, it's like the best thing to do is let's analyze more of the brain. Let's try and replicate what's going on in the brain in machines. Maybe not computers doing models of things, maybe computers doing models of things, but that seems to be our best way of getting at what's going on for now. So yeah, sorry, I've not fully answered your question though, I suppose. So I'm not saying that it definitely is purely material, but tentatively it seems like that's the best candidate option that's available. So and there's various ones you could go within that. So like some people are like what's called functionalists. Some people might be like behaviorists. I mean, I'm not sure that either of those are completely true, though they might be partly true. Some people are like property dualists, or some people are like emergentists, which mean that they think that the what we call consciousness or kind of first person experience emerges out of the underlying kind of physical state. So it's not there in any, like in an individual neuron or an atom that's in the brain or something, but it is, like when it's in this particular combination, consciousness emerges out. Some people are going to say something called panpsychism is true, which is where there's there's various versions again, but where there's essentially consciousness in fundamental particles that make it, like fundamental particles have an experience, and then when they're combined in our particular configuration, it's a sort of more sophisticated experience like ours. Some philosophers are going to even Christian philosophers like Bishop Berkeley are going to become idealists and just chop off the material completely. Now that's not a route I'm going down just now, because I think there's more to be told in that, in trying to like investigate what the sciences have to tell us. But yeah, I think that seems to be where we're learning the most at the moment. So that's where my bet is, but I could be wrong.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. Guys, I want to thank you guys. There's like 35 people here right now, which is awesome. Thank you for being here. And I want to let you know that I'm ignoring the chat right now just because I can't do two things at once. And I usually like to say hi to everybody and talk to people in the chat. but I really have to like pay attention to what Nathan's saying. Otherwise, all this stuff is just going to go over my head, and like probably already 25% of it has. So
I'll try, and if I'm saying like too much jargon or anything as well, like stop me, because sometimes I need to like, like think that other people haven't spent a lot of time like looking into philosophy, learning weird words and things.
Yes.
And so do like tell me, and I'll try and like catch myself if I'm doing that.
No, I think you're doing really well right now. But yes, I like have almost zero interest in philosophy. It's just too many words, and just the labor that you have to endure to, just I don't have like the energy for like reading several pages to understand a small concept. And so, yeah, I respect people who take the time and do that. That's really,
but yeah, I get it
great
as well.
Yeah. So, but if you guys have questions, Jeremy's writing down any questions that you're putting in the chat, and we will ask Nathan questions at some point. But I just wanted to tell you guys how I got to know Nathan. And this is actually the first time we've ever had like a conversation. But I mean, really basically than just like short messages online. But I found his channel. Somehow YouTube served me up one of his videos, and I ended up kind of scanning his channel, and I thought he was Christian, and I zeroed in on his testimony of how he became a Christian. And I watched that testimony and I was like, wow, this is great testimony. I loved your story, Nathan. In fact, I even put your story on my website. Okay.
Awesome.
And then I wrote a message to Nathan and I said, wow, that was a great testimony. Thanks for sharing. Then Nathan writes back to me and says, well, actually, I'm not a Christian anymore. And I was like, what? Shocker. Yeah. So I just wanted to, since you were a Christian for a little while, can you tell us a bit about your experience as a Christian?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I won't rehash everything in that story because I guess it's still there. I keep it up for the sake of like, even though I disagree with my views at that time, I think it's important for people to see that I'm doing my best to be honest and engage with these ideas and things over time. So that's there if anyone does want to check it out. But to briefly touch on it, I guess. So I'm adopted. I really struggled with that. And then as I was a young man in adulthood, I had a few things kind of happen, like needing surgeries and stuff. And I was in a very bad place psychologically. And at that time, I guess I sort of came across Jordan Peterson, and he opened up the idea that Christianity might have some solutions in terms of giving me ideas to sort of structure my life around. And so I started going along to a Bible study at a local church. And that was on Fridays. And I guess I enjoyed it. Like I enjoyed talking to other people about this because I didn't have anything like that in my life at the time. And this gets a bit more into my experience with Christianity, I suppose. But I do remember like my initial comments as I went in, and they weren't particularly good because I was more parroting Jordan Peterson. I'd now probably disagree with what I said, but I was talking a bit about ancient Near Eastern cultures within which Genesis was written, for example. And I was talking about the ancient Mesopotamian story of the god Marduk, and like creation myths that had to do with like a battle between like Marduk and Tiamat and the chaos monster. And there's various other stories. I think Rahab, who's mentioned in Isaiah, Isaiah actually says, didn't you create the world out of Rahab, or something to that effect around Isaiah 53. These stories have kind of had a prevalent influence throughout a lot of the Old Testament. And I came in saying a bunch of this stuff, and in a really conservative evangelical sort of setting. And I think it made them feel very uncomfortable because they weren't used to thinking in those terms. You know, like the Bible is a book of facts. It's a book of propositions about the way the world is, and it's to be taken on those terms. And I wasn't engaging in that way. And I guess some of the feedback, the social feedback mechanisms from the group about like, this is like the wrong way to engage with it or whatever, sort of made an impression on me. So I got the idea over time that that's like sort of the wrong way to think about it. And so my thought moved more towards like a sort of evangelical type, and again, Protestant Christianity, even though I think if I'd gone to Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, I may not even have ever become an atheist at all, sort of thing. Like, I mean, I never became like a full on it, but I wouldn't have become like a not Christian, maybe. I don't know, because they have like a very different approach to faith. But I think it was this idea that the Bible is like a set of like facts just written as is, like a list of almost like bullet point facts, and you go through and you figure out what's happened in history, how is the world, what's going to happen in the future. And then also another part of that church that I was in was Calvinism as well, which that began to make an impression on me a bit later. I guess one of the first Christian books that I read was in fact Augustine's Confessions. So Augustine was when he was kind of like a rhetorician, which is sort of, I suppose, like philosophy, but it was more important, you know, for people who were like doing law or politics or anything like that they'd be able to speak and put forward arguments and things. And he was, I think he was a Manichaean at one point. I can't remember if he was something else before that. Maybe he was I think he was raised a Christian maybe by his mother, and then he became a Manichaean. Manichaeanism being this sort of religion where it almost sounds quite Eastern to us now, I think. This idea that there's like an ultimate good and evil that is sort of warring it out, and that's the ultimate state of affairs in reality. And then he talks in his Confessions about how he'd built these like hero philosophers up, like I think Mani is the leader, and then he engaged with this person and they didn't actually seem to be as well informed as he thought. He talks basically quite candidly about his depression, how his heart still kind of yearned after answers, but he didn't have them. And he engaged in a lifestyle where he had a kid, for example, with a woman that he then wasn't with. I think more because of familial pressure to marry someone else of higher standing. But anyway, he left her, and I think he felt a lot of guilt because of that. And one day in this dark period in his life, he went out and sat under a pear tree. And I think he's reminiscing about this story of when he was younger, he stole some pears from a tree with his friends, but not because they were hungry or because they needed the pears, but just because for the sheer thrill of stealing, of doing something wrong. And he felt kind of pretty wretched about himself. But then he says that he heard a kid over in the neighboring garden who was saying, it's all right. He was saying,
sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So the kid in the neighboring garden is saying "ecce tolle," which in Latin means like pick it up and read or something. I'm not particularly good at Latin, so maybe that's not quite right. But so he picks up the Bible and he turns to a verse in Paul, which basically confirms the way he's feeling about himself at the time. Something like, I can't remember which verse it is, so I'll probably get it wrong, but something about wickedness coming out of the heart of man, and but righteousness being in God. And this kind of confirms to him that God's real. And he spends some time with a bishop called Ambrose, who teaches him about Christianity, and it becomes more and more true for him. And then he becomes this seminal figure in kind of philosophy and history and Christianity, who establishes all these doctrines and things. But his journey and life of sort of where he'd come from, the ideas he was exploring, that I think the depression he was expressing, I mean, he wouldn't have put it in those terms, really resonated with me and where I was at that time. So I thought, well, like Augustine here seems to have some intellectually satisfying answers to these questions. And so I'm going to also like go down this avenue of becoming a Christian. So that was one thing that also really compelled me to sort of like take that step to saying like, I am a Christian now, as opposed to just being someone who's not sure, going to Bible studies and stuff. I guess I also was going to Sunday services and things. So obviously being preached at there and learning about the Bible but a particular Calvinist theology in that setting, and a Calvinist theology in the Bible studies as well, which I guess began to impress on me over time. And then also had like one-to-one sessions with a ministry trainee from a church. I think I feel in those sessions I was more manipulated and pressed, because I think he was quite eager to get a convert, because he was a ministry trainee, right? So I think he felt the need to sort of push onto me ideas of guilt and things, or that I wasn't living right, and also to sort of really, really get me to confess that Jesus was my savior, to like speak those magic words and somehow something would change, I guess. And so that was something that also sort of developed my thought and made an impression on me over time. And I think even like watching films like The Passion of the Christ, I remember watching that at Easter for the first time as a Christian, and just be like crying about the way that Jesus was treated, feeling really bad about that, but feeling so kind of overwhelmed with happiness that the resurrection was this real event in history, that all the kind of badness of humanity and wicked man was sort of could be redeemed through that, at least. And then I'm trying to think about other things that kind of influenced my thought throughout those times. I guess also like YouTube videos. Like there's a YouTube channel called Bruce Gore. I think he's a teacher at a private Christian school in America. He's got a series on the history of philosophy, but it's from a Christian perspective. That got me interested in philosophy, really. He's also got a series on church history that was really interesting. There's an open course. I think it's like an undergraduate certificate from Gordon Conwell University. They'd stopped doing the certification by the time I came to take it, but all the tapes and lectures are still up there. So there's like New Testament 1, Old Testament 1, hermeneutics and stuff like that. I did all those sorts of things through those audio series, and that also informed my thought. Reading lots and lots of apologetics, getting involved in YouTube apologetics as well. Not so much making videos on my channel, which I did begin to do towards the end of my time in Christianity, but more like watching other channels. I even became a big fan of Dan Brown for a certain amount of time, who I now kind of consider homophobic and sort of quite toxic political views and stuff. But I was quite into him and how he had to frame the spiritual warfare that's going on in reality, which I was convinced of. I also got involved in evangelism quite a lot with my church. So pretty much every weekend we'd be going out in my local town and handing out like tracts and Bibles and talking to people about Jesus. And I even gave up a couple of weeks of my holiday to go to like a different town and do this evangelism as well. And so just similarly, like pray in the mornings, go out, hand out tracts and things all day, and then come back. And this also, like the whole time as I talk to people, as their concerns were on this world and not on Christian theology and the kind of things I cared about, it just confirmed to me that Christianity was true and the spiritual warfare side of things was true, and people were kind of blinded by their sin and needed Jesus to save them. And a whole bunch of stuff about all that, but maybe I'll stop around there and see what you think of all. Like I've said a lot, so.
Oh yeah, cool. Well, thanks for sharing your experiences. And so when you were having when you were going out and doing evangelism and stuff, because obviously it seems like you were like pretty passionate about it at one point. So were you like having experiences with God? Like, I mean, I'm not that you would interpret it that way now, but like, were you like at that time feeling like you were having experiences with God?
Yeah, I would definitely have framed it that way at the time. Like in private prayer, so I struggle with quite bad depression, and I guess my treatment for it, I would think that was a symptom of spiritual warfare. And then kind of like how Jesus always goes off and prays in private in the Gospels, I tried to model my life after him. So I'd like go for a walk in nature and find somewhere to pray and pray for hours. And I guess I sort of think that the kind of emptiness of nature was like God teaching me a lesson about like suffering like Christ or something. Also in church, I would have said when we were singing hymns or something, and the way that the stained glass light was kind of coming in through the window, the way that the music would harmonize, and even I'd think about the sort of bassy notes of a husband and the more kind of like treble notes of a wife, and the way that they'd synchronize together. And I think this all reflects God's created order as it comes to worship him. And I'd articulate that as me experiencing God or theosis at that time, or something like that. As you've kind of said, I don't interpret it in those terms now, but I would have said that those are, and also like before communion, like feeling, like having the sort of, I mean, having the guilt laid on is a sort of bad way of putting it, I guess. But in those times, I'd feel really bad about myself, and then I'd go and receive communion, and I genuinely feel forgiven. And there'd be someone maybe playing like piano or something in the background, and reflect in prayer, and maybe like cry about what a worthless sinner I felt that I was, and how I was forgiven through Jesus, and that I could take this like sacrament and stuff. So I mean, that wasn't also that kind of Catholicism wasn't the particular theology of the church, but it was just how I kind of felt about it, I guess, and how I'd come to it through my teachings. And so I'd kind of like cry about that and say that was me experiencing God in those circumstances.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you mentioned Calvinism, and one of the things that, and okay, I loved your testimony, but there was one aspect of your testimony that when I watched it, I thought, ooh, I hope, like, and it was, I noticed that there was a big focus on like how depraved humanity was, and like every like thing in the heart is so awful. And I know that is like one aspect of that's like really strong in Calvinism, is that they really, they take like one verse in the Bible that says like the human heart is desperately wicked, it's wicked, who can, you can't even know how wicked it is, something like that. And they like really like focus a lot on like how it basically they make humanity worthless, which, kind of, and I'm sorry, I don't usually pick on Christian groups in my on my channel, but I mean, this is an aspect that does concern me. And so like, would you say that like, and so they kind of make humanity like basically trash, and then you're like, okay, I'm this worthless trash before God. I'm so wicked. And and like, so it kind of like strips humanity of worth. And I'm not saying that like, and I don't think that's like from God. I don't think that's what God intended. Like, I believe that, yes, we do wicked things, but like, we're still made in the image of God, and human beings are still capable of doing great good. And, even when they're far away from God, there's so many human beings who are doing great and noble things. And it's, it's not that every act that we do is so wicked. So I was just kind of wondering, like, do you think that is one of the factors that, as you're processing? Let me just ask it this way. What do you think the factors or ideas were that kind of like caused you to stop believing?
Sure. I guess before fully going into that answer, it'd also be worth caveating that on my sort of way out in my last 6 months of being a Christian, I did actually sort of push back quite hard against the Calvinism. And, like I became really interested. I think I probably watched like every video on like Soteriology 101 with Leighton Flowers, started consuming arguments in favor of like libertarian free will in philosophy literature, started reading up on like Erasmus and what he had to say to Luther, because Luther and Erasmus had this big run-in about free will historically in Christian history. And, I was really convinced that free will was a really important aspect of Christianity in those last 6 months. And I was pushing back, like whenever Calvinism was read into a verse, I'd always be like, well, there's this other verse here, about, well, God will always give you a way out. So why would God be giving you a way out if there's no real choice? Or, also in the Old Testament verses about turn back, turning children in Jeremiah, I think, and even in Isaiah. There's I mean, there's stuff that sounds quite Calvinistic, but then you've got to take it with the other stuff if you're doing systematic theology in that way. So I sort of had come out of Calvinism before I came out of Christianity, but I think it wasn't until I was no longer identifying as a Christian, and I was reading Aldous Huxley, actually, he was an agnostic and, well, perennialist, so I guess a kind of theist maybe, but he was raised in the English public schools, where he would have had a really austere Christianity in his upbringing, and he had a really, really harsh criticism of Calvinism in his Island book, which is like it's a sort of philosophical story. It's about like what would an ideal human society look like, and how would that society cope if it came into contact with the way that we live now. And there's a few pages in that where he kind of deals with Calvinism and has some of the problems with it. And it wasn't until I was reading that, not identifying as a Christian anymore, that I could see how kind of horrible it was, so psychologically, how unhealthy and kind of toxic, and how, if I could take away sort of almost all my experiences, and I was sat with like an all-loving God predicting the type of theology that he would give to humanity, say, or something like that, it wouldn't be of that kind at all, really. It would be of a very different kind. That would be more, I think even the Calvinism like that would be more of like an evil God in my view. So that's to say, yeah. So the question was, how much did that play a role in my deconversion? Is that right?
Kind of like that did that play a role, and did other things play a role, and like what were the other factors and ideas that ultimately caused you to walk away?
Well, I think there were definitely issues. Like I was constantly trying to like ease cognitive dissonance. Like I remember in some of the Bible studies I ran, for example, when I was painting the picture of sort of the story of original sin and how people needed to have, because my theology was that people needed to have the correct belief in Jesus in order to be saved and not go to hell. So then in this conversation with someone in one of the Bible studies that I was leading at work, he was saying like, in like a hypothetical world, for example, where you could like lobotomize people, so they'd be basically like vegetables for the rest of their life, but what they would do is they'd have the right belief about Jesus. Like you could remove this part of the brain which would damage them, it'd mentally damage them, so they'd have to be like fed through a tube or whatever. They couldn't do all this stuff, but it would give them the right belief about Jesus. Is that the morally good thing to do? Because then they'd go and I like couldn't really like resolve these, because I was like, yeah, that kind of makes what I'm saying, the answer should be it should clearly be yes, because like the most important thing is these people not going to hell forever, but also something seems clearly really wrong about doing that. And I'm saying that I've got the truth and the moral standard, like God is the moral standard of goodness. You don't even have one. And yet like that is like really in conflict, like with the theology seemed to be in conflict with my moral intuitions. There are a bunch of those sorts of things. Also the difficulty of like different denominations, they're not seeming to be a reliable way of doing systematic theology, of coming to scripture and figuring out like a complete kind of worldview based on scripture, because people seem to do this and just come to completely different conclusions. And so it just seemed like a really unreliable method. And also just, I think morally it didn't quite make sense with my experience of people. Like I'd be being told one thing about the way reality was and people were, but then I'd be going to work and people would be a very different way. They'd just be normal with me. So I'd be told like they're deserving of hell, and I guess it kind of dehumanized them or something in a certain way. But then when they'd just be like, oh, I was seeing this girl this weekend, it didn't go that well, and I'd be like, well, that's because I'd be like, that's immoral because you're dating outside of marriage or something, so you deserve it. But actually another part of me that was still human was like, yeah, like like you're just having this experience of trying to like do your best and make your way in the world, and there's nothing that bad about that. And so there were all these areas of cognitive dissonance. And then also I was in a relationship with someone when I came into Christianity, and this ministry trainee person had pressured me in a lot of areas in my life. Like, he'd pressured me into, I think, a conversion in the first place, but then also sort of telling me that we were living in sin. And so, like, the best thing that God wanted me to do was to get married, for example. He was also he pressured me into giving up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I used to train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu like 5 times a week. I ran the intro classes 2 times a week. He told me that was a false idol and I needed to give it up. So I had this really awkward conversation where I was like, oh, I'm a Christian now, so I need to give up Jiu-Jitsu because I feel like I did wrong against a real friend there, someone who'd helped me out by giving me a job teaching jiu-jitsu in the evenings and stuff like that. And I was just like, oh, this is a false idol, so I'm gonna like discard you or something. And that felt really, really quite like a bad thing for me to do. But I guess I developed these emotional reasons to leave Christianity, even though and it was when I had intellectual reasons, I think, to leave already. I think anyone has intellectual reasons available to them at any time to sort of rationalize any worldview that they'd want to go down. It's only when those emotional reasons come to the surface that they're actually motivated to take those steps. So I think for me, being hurt in those ways, and then also the ministry, I wanted to go and study philosophy and then go into the ministry after that, and I was like planning my life out in that way. And obviously I proposed to this person that I'd been in a relationship to because I'd been told I was living in sin. And then I was thinking, well, now there's a tension because she wanted to settle down and have kids now, and I was like, well, I'm not ready. I want to go off and study philosophy. And so I think the ministry trainee, felt a bit threatened by me learning so much about Christianity when he was a ministry trainee and was kind of learning as well. And so he told me that philosophy was an intellectual idol. I had to give that up and be with her because even though I enjoyed it, Christ wanted me to suffer and be with her, even if the relationship wasn't the best thing. And I felt like he really sort of facilitated us breaking up. He kind of like, I wanted to have private, like a sit down and talk with her, and he was like, well, no, actually I'm going to be there and we're going to sit down and talk now. And it felt really, really quite wrong. And that, that gave me I think the emotional reasons to further investigate those intellectual issues. But I think I would still have considered myself a Christian at that point. I was just kind of grasping at apologetics and stuff. This was when I was like, really, really into like inspiring philosophy, capturing Christianity and stuff like that. And it wasn't until, me and the person who I was with had kind of like formally split up, got back together a bunch of times over about 6 months, and then we were apart. And then one evening I went on Doug Pine Creek's channel, and I was still considering myself a Christian at this point, but that was when I think the contradictions, but the cognitive dissonance was really brought to the forefront of my mind in that conversation. And then it just sort of, it wasn't good enough then to kind of go back to church and hear kind of like poorly rationalized reasons from people who I didn't really like anyway, I guess. And then that began my process out of Christianity, I think, at that point, really. I just couldn't make it work anymore in that way.
What was the like cognitive dissonance? Like, what happened on Pine Creek channel? I don't even know if that's a Christian channel or what that is.
It's not a Christian channel. Doug's not a Christian. He was a Christian for about 50 years or so. But yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So what happened on that channel that like brought it all up?
So Doug does something. Well, I think firstly, one of the reasons Doug is really good is because he's intimately familiar with the Christian worldview. So in a conversation, he knows the motivating factors, the fears, the rewards, and stuff like that. So those things really work in his favor in terms of like he can explore them with a Christian in a way that maybe someone who hadn't had those experiences with Christianity could. But I think what he brought to the forefront was this idea that the justifications that I was offering, I was justifying my Christian belief in a particular kind of way, And I could see that way that I was justifying it was the same for the Mormon, for the Muslim, for the Hindu. And yet I rejected those beliefs. And so I was being inconsistent. And so when I realized that there was this kind of contradiction, I was saying, it's okay for me to justify it in that way, but it's not okay for any of these other people to justify it in that way. And furthermore, they're wrong. That kind of made me think, well, I was like, really, how can I justify this over? And I kept coming back to like, like my personal experiences, for example. And I was like, yeah, but the Mormon's going to tell me that they've got the burning in the bosom. So I can't, like, what's the extra tethering point I can have? And then I was like, well, I've taken psychedelics before, for example, and I know I can have a very different kind of religious experience. And I guess then I began like listening to Pine Creek, and he's had lots of these conversations. And I saw, even with, I suppose, my like intellectual heroes, like apologists and people like that, I saw him offer better criticisms of them than they had responses to. And I think also that the maybe one of the real straws that broke the camel's back in that situation as well was being able to laugh at my beliefs as well. Like when I was able to like laugh at some of the things I believed as being silly, like it kind of lost its power, its emotional power over me, like the fear of hell and all those sorts of things. And then I guess I began engaging with what atheists and agnostics had to say in response as a criticism of Christianity, but not just to learn about it, to address it as like an apologetic argument, but to actually like listen to what the content was. And I guess, it all kind of proceeds on from there.
You've mentioned hell several times. Do you feel like that was one of the ideas that was just like appalling that you couldn't, that like caused you to reject Christianity?
I actually think while I was in Christianity, even though it was very difficult for me to reconcile, like it caused me cognitive dissonance, the fact that people didn't seem deserving of that. But I think I was okay. Like I had this idea of God that was so good that he couldn't possibly do something unjust. Like I was like, I don't know what the ins and outs of it are, but justice will be done. And that's sort of the best I can say. I don't know what that looks like. So that wasn't a big reason in me leaving, but maybe the cognitive dissonance was there that sort of caused me to think it wasn't true or something. I also think like I did really try and make sense of universalism as well. Like I read some of David Bentley Hart's stuff, who's a Christian universalist. But I think by that point, I'd sort of swapped out so many of my foundational beliefs that it didn't really matter what my doctrine of like hell was from reading the Bible or something, because there were bigger questions about why I even think any of this corresponds to like a metaphysical reality at all.
Okay. Wow. Thanks for sharing your experience. I think this might be a good time to just get some questions. Do you have?
There's a lot of discussion in the chat, but no clear questions.
Oh, okay.
Other than someone asked for Nathan to share about what he thinks of near-death experiences.
Okay, so I guess there's been a lot of discussion in the chat, so thank you guys. But there haven't been a lot of clear questions, except that someone did ask you to share what's your impression of near-death experiences?
Sure. Yeah. And I'd say if people do have questions, like maybe, or they've put them in the chat again now, and we can go over them. I don't think that there aren't any near-death experiences I've investigated that would convince me that there's anything going on there that a natural story can't be told about. So again, I don't have full explanations for any or all of these, but a lot of them come down to hearsay and retelling over time. And we even see this with, like we did a bad apologetics episode on it, and we see Gary Habermas, who's a Christian apologist. We actually like looked at multiple clips of him telling a story about a particular NDE, and the original source was a book of like a collection of anecdotes. So we looked at the original source for that book, which was a doctor telling a story, an anecdote in a documentary, right? So that's the original source. And then we can see Gary Habermas, as he retells this NDE story in different interviews, he adds in details that aren't a part of the original book. So like he says, for example, there's these numbers that are riveted into the top of a machine, and it makes it sound more plausible. It makes it sound like this person gave like informative details and things, which actually he's inventing and adding into the story. So I think there's a lot of those sorts of things that go on with NDEs. There's also something called anesthesia awareness, which is present in a lot of operations when people have particular types of anesthetics, a significant amount. So obviously people are going to have a kind of distorted experience of what's going on in reality, but it doesn't mean that they'll have no details. I mean, in terms of not going too deeply into this, because we went very deeply in the bad apologetics, but one of the best studies out there, one of the best evidence studies, is the AWARE study. And basically in that, there was only one detail recalled that was veridical. And that detail, I think, was to the effect of that there was a male nurse wearing blue or something like that. And again, it doesn't seem to me like there's no other way he could have figured out that detail other than being outside of his body. It seems like he could have seen the doctor or something before the surgery, or seen what nurses and things were wearing, and sort of refilled in the details in his memory after the fact, because these memory biases and distortions, again, they're really powerful. There's a ton of literature on them. So I mean, it's one of those things where I'd say in principle, right? In principle, if under those conditions of the AWARE study, some other details came out, like some really, really specific details, like not like there was a male nurse wearing blue who was a bit chubby or whatever, but like here's like 6 digits or something that were written on the top of the lighting in the room, something like that would really give me reason to like question. I don't know that I'd be, it doesn't mean as well that an alternative would become immediately available, because it's not clear what the best alternative explanation then is. You know, maybe that falsifies certain natural theories of mind, but then do we immediately jump to Cartesian dualism? I don't know. It would just mean there's more work to be done to figure out, you know, like a complete theory of mind is going to have to take into account that those phenomena happen. Like people can have those experiences where they're not geospatially like around where their brain and body and sense organs seem to be.
Cool. There's a really good question here in the chat. Thank you, Hannah. It says, Nathan, if there was no hell and there is a God that was infinitely loving, only wanted your happiness, and didn't seek to control you, would you ever want to have a relationship with him?
Yes, definitely.
Cool. And then, okay, now I lost it. Looks like something disappeared. Hold on. Okay. My question was, can any amount of information about the natural world negate an unnatural co-explanation or cause? That's from Converse Contender.
Well, it depends what he means. Negate supernatural explanation. I think that's what
amount of information about the natural world negate an unnatural Can you simplify that?
Yeah. So I think what he's saying, right, is like, okay, let's say we've got something that's happened, right? So I don't know, we come to, I mean, I always use the example of like, we're walking down a street and we see like there's a shattered window and a brick looks like it's been put through it, right? And there's like a TV stand, but there's not a TV on it. And so we're going to go, we think, I wonder what happened here, right? And now the what we can see there, the phenomena, it doesn't force us to any particular explanation. So there's various things that could have happened for us to be able to see what we can see there. So it could be the case that one guy came along, right? He thought, I'm having that TV, threw a brick through the window, and he just stole it. It could be that there was actually one guy came along, lobbed a brick because he just enjoys throwing bricks. And then a second guy came along, saw a broken window, and decides he's going to go in and steal the TV. That's like another explanation where we'd have everything that we see there, but it's a different story about what happened. And I guess what I think it was Converse Contender who asked that. I guess what he's asking is there any amount of information about natural causal reality? So that's like I guess the kind of stuff that like physics is telling us about, or like naturalist philosophy, which is going to be based heavily off physics, I guess, that is going to, which is going to tell you absolutely that there can't be in principle a supernatural explanation of it. So the idea that, like another possible explanation for the smashed window and the missing TV is that, I don't know, a demon came, or Thor came down and decided he wants that TV, so he threw the brick through the window and came and took it away, or a UFO came down or something. I mean, that'd be more natural. But the idea is that there's these competing explanations, and just having a natural explanation doesn't actually rule out, it doesn't say that it couldn't have been one of the other ones. But I think what we do is we assess the candidate explanations based on various theoretical virtues. And I think a part of those, I mean, some of those theoretical virtues, for example, is going to be like something called like parsimony. Like you might have heard of Occam's razor, which is the idea that we don't postulate entities beyond necessity for what they're explaining, or various formulations to that effect. And it's that idea that if the work of the explanation can be done with one thing, then we go with that, and we don't go with the explanation that has two or three things. There's other sort of theoretical virtues. I mean, some people will say that it agreeing with your intuitions is a theoretical virtue, right? And a lot of Christians are going to argue on that basis for Christianity being a better explanation of some things. I think also the way that an explanation coheres with our pre-existing commitments. So if we've got an explanation that's sufficient for the evidence that we see, that is consistent with a bunch of background beliefs that we've got, and then we've got an explanation that isn't consistent with them, we should go with the one that's consistent with everything else we know about the world already, because it means that we don't have to like completely reformulate the entire, like reassess everything that we know just to explain this one data point. I think that might be an important part of how we come to like assess these explanations. But to answer the question, nothing about the natural explanation, I mean, I could change my mind on this in future, is going to rule out in principle that there could be a supernatural one beyond it. It's just that you don't need it, I think. Yeah, that's...
Very cool. Okay, thanks for the suggestions that I'm seeing in the chat from Linguisti, and let's see, Grayback was talking to me too. Anyway, I'm going to go back and read this whole chat after we're done. So thanks guys for all your suggestions. And I do see a question mark here, so let me see what this is. Okay, wait, I think she's talking to Hannah. Okay, so cool. Well, I wanted to, this question just came to my mind as we were talking. How do you, when you think about Jesus now, how do you feel about him as, a person? Do you still believe he existed? And how do you feel about him when you think about him? Yeah,
I definitely believe that Jesus existed as a historical feature, a historical person. I'm pretty confident about that, but there's going to be a lot going on here, I guess, in what's informing what I think about Jesus. But I do think that there is something that's called mimesis in the New Testament. So, for example, the authors thinking that it's a legitimate thing to do to look at where details are missing about Jesus' life, to look at the Old Testament and fill in the gaps based off of that. Also, I think that the New Testament authors who are influenced by Hellenistic culture are also doing things that sort of are like a nod and a wink to like Homeric epics and things like that. So you'll see those literary devices in the New Testament if you are interested in classics and stuff and go that far. But I don't think that it's just that. I don't think that, I wouldn't put it down to just mythicism or anything like that. I think that there is, I think the best explanation is that there's an actual historical figure at the center of this. I guess where I differ from an Orthodox Christian, I suppose, or a realist Christian, would be that I don't think that that Jesus physically rose from the dead, and I don't think that he was the Son of God in this, if the sense of that word means like the logos is like this thing that exists being incarnate as a person. I don't think that picture of like a metaphysical thing happening of reality happened that way. My view is that he was an apocalyptic prophet, and he basically taught that the end times were coming now. Like it's gonna happen like now. He actually died, and when he was crucified, his believers were, his followers, I mean, this is a really short summary, were kind of like traumatized by what happened, and not only traumatized, but then also they're kind of like, you see this thing in When Prophecy Fails by Leo Festinger, a study of like how cults are formed now, where people kind of like double down on beliefs and stuff when they're in those kind of settings, and something goes wrong, some big prediction goes wrong. Like you see it with Jehovah's Witness cults and things, for example, when they predict the end of the world is coming and then it doesn't, and then how they make sense of it. And I think something like that happened, which led to we're talking about the really kind of early church sort of mythologizing Jesus, or maybe mythologizing isn't the word I want to go for, maybe theologizing Jesus. So I think there's a historical Jesus who sits behind it, but then there are people who are steeped in theology, like their worldview is incredibly religious. They don't look at reality and think of like causation in terms of these like spatio-temporal events like I do. Like they're thinking in terms of like meanings, in terms of like divine providential meanings, and the things that they see around them and stuff like that. And so for them, I think processing the way that they felt about the world, it was a perfectly legitimate thing to do, to then begin to tell this story about what had happened to Jesus. And then I think that those informed people's experiences as well, about having seen like resurrection appearances and things. And there's various different, obviously, accounts of people having seen Jesus, but I think that they're accounted for by things like pareidolia, for example, and various other phenomena.
What's pareidolia?
So it's the tendency of humans to sort of see meaningful patterns that aren't there. So just if there's kind of like it's the Jesus toast type thing, basically, to reduce it
yes,
down.
you talked about that earlier. Okay, cool.
Or it's like looking at a constellation in the sky, and going, oh, that one looks like, that one's clearly a lion or whatever, and maybe the other person's like, what do you want about? Is that sort of thing? And I think that, for example, like one of my friends, Camille, puts forward the theory that first the 12 saw him, and then the 500. It could just well be that there's kind of like a cloud or something right in the sky, and they interpret it as this big like theological symbol. I don't know that is exactly what happened, but I don't see any reason to reject that when I see in like there's actually a YouTube channel called I See God in Everything, where like for example, like Elon Musk's rocket taking off, there's like clouds and things, and he's like, look, you can see Jesus in this cloud, you can see so I think that is clearly something that humans like can do. And then I think obviously all the theology happens. There's fighting between kind of like different groups with slightly different theologies about Jesus over time. And then, like one eventually kind of wins out, and various heresies, and the whole of Christian history. But that's what I see is happening with it, at the base of it, Jesus as a man. But for me, in my life, that story is incredibly important. And I think the tragedy of that story as well, of Jesus suffering and dying on a cross, is something that definitely informs my ethics a lot too, I would say.
Cool. What do you make of like all the miracles? Because I mean, looking and finding Jesus in clouds or burnt toast is one thing, but like, what about like blind people seeing, people being raised from the dead, not just Jesus, but all the people mentioned in the Bible who rose from the dead. Do you just like dismiss that? Like, how do you deal with and modern day miracles? Like, I've seen people get instantly healed from things. And so like, how do you handle miracles?
Yeah, sure. In principle, a lot of apologists will want to strawman what naturalists do and say that you're a priori ruling out miracles. I'm not doing that. I think that miracles can happen even on whatever terms that like John Lennox or Andrew Locke, someone wants to describe them in. God injects a new event into the system, which from his point of view has a probability of one of happening, like it has to happen. Okay, that's absolutely fine. The point is, from my standpoint, right, I'm looking at the world and I have like a probabilistic sense of anything that's going to happen, anything that might have happened in the past, anything that's going to happen in the future. And there seem to be certain regularities, and things like people being raised from the dead seem to be like, it seems like most people die and stay dead in my experience, like 99.99999 or whatever % of people. And so someone rising from the dead, even if miracles can happen, is going to be really, really improbable. So then the question is, as we come to assess the evidence that's there for this improbable description having happened, is the quality of the evidence so good that it overrides the improbability of the event having happened, right? Is basically the way that I come to assess this. So when I look at the quality of the evidence in the Gospels, it doesn't seem to me that it's so good in the sense that it's so indubitable. Like it's various kind of writings that are collected together. There's even, like if you, as you study church history and stuff, you find like what's even in the canon is like questionable. Like there's things like the Shepherd of Hermas that aren't in there. There's things in there where it's like, should they even be in there? Like Jude, where it's talking about like the Book of Enoch, which Protestants don't admit into the Old Testament canon, but then they have this whole story in Jude about stuff that's happening in the Book of Enoch. It's so clearly there's a bunch of kind of competing stories. They sort of on the face of it, that a lot of them don't contradict with each other. Like there's a story in Acts about when Paul goes on his mission, the direction he goes in and for what durations of time. In Galatians, which is written by Paul, it's the opposite direction in different lengths of time. And so there's all these, the contradictions can be harmonized, but I have to ask myself, is it with that kind of evidence, is the quality of it so good that it warrants me believing in a miracle? Or is it more justified for me to think that actually the kind of thing that I see going on with what like Osho's cult, which there's a Netflix documentary on, or the kind of things that we see going on with like Leo Festinger's when prophecy fails, with even like Mormonism, say, is it more likely that sort of thing's going on? And it seems like the Gospels make more sense under the theory that they're the product of that. So when it comes to miracles, there was an attempt by a lot of like liberal German theologians to sort of assume that all miracles in the Gospels were things that took place that had a natural explanation. So like the seizure of a boy is epilepsy or something like that, rather than a demon possession. And maybe there's a bit of that going on, but I actually think that there's also a lot of theological license going on, which the authors weren't like methodological naturalists. They weren't in a university going through peer review, like doing like source criticism, textual criticism, stuff like that. I think that they probably would have thought like praying about the kind of things as they work out their theology and like reading in the Old Testament and to figure out what was going on were valid things to do. And that has also influenced some of those kind of like miracle stories and things that we see, is that they're trying to write in a way that, if Jesus was the Messiah, which we already know, then what are some other details we've missed out of his life from asking these people? Oh, well, Daniel says he did this, so he did this. He's born in in the narrative in Luke, the census. The Messiah has to be born here, so we're going to have a census, and he's going to go back to Bethlehem. I think that those sorts of things are going on, and it's not that the author's being dishonest and lying. They're thinking like that's like that's actually like a perfectly valid thing to do, because their foundational belief is like Jesus was the Messiah, and he's written about in the Old Testament and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay, well, there's a lot of good stuff happening in the chat. I did see a question, but it's like way back up there. So if you want that question asked, put it back in there. So I think it might be good to kind of wrap it up with just, I had a couple more questions I was going to ask you. Okay, here's the question from Undone Sums. People have equal belief in Christ, yet different moral beliefs. Is it therefore inevitable that any true second coming would be seen as a false Messiah by, say, 50% of people?
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, I genuinely, like, if I put my sort of Christian realist hat back on and think that the Bible tells this metaphysical story about reality and God and what's going to happen in the future, I genuinely am not even sure what kind of things would be going on as Jesus returns, like whether we would see what's the word, ecumenical reunion or something, in a sense, because of all the signs that were going on. You know, we see everyone, all the Protestants and Catholics and Eastern Orthodox and stuff all come together, or whether we wouldn't see that. And I just don't know what it would look like, what would happen under those circumstances, what work, because you've got to take into account as well that if you take that realist account of Christianity, there's a paraclete, a helper, the Holy Spirit, who is working in the hearts of Christians, guiding them into all truth and understanding. And who knows what role that entity would be doing in those times to, bring Christians to particular beliefs or whatever. I just don't know whether I could say like 50% of people would and wouldn't believe. I have no idea. I mean, I think some people wouldn't believe, maybe, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There's a couple more questions. Grayback wants to know when you're going to host a next interesting debate on the resurrection.
Oh, yeah. I would love, if I don't know if Camille's still here in the chat, but I want to have him talk to more people, like maybe Jonathan McLatchie at some point, the McGrews, if I could get them. I think that would be really interesting. So yeah, I'd like to.
And then here's a really good question. Nathan, how do you respond to people who might claim you were never a sincere Christian?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's partly why I leave, like my conversion testimony and stuff like that up, because I want people to be able to see that it was being sincere. Obviously, for some people, that's not going to do it. But then I think there comes a certain point where if you're dealing with someone who's going to tell you that they know your own mental states better than you, like there's only so much you can do. Like it's like if I was telling you, that you're a green person or something, and that you're thinking about broccoli, like you're really hungry for broccoli or something, and you could be like, no, I'm not, I actually want chocolate. And I'm just gonna go, no, you really, like, I'm telling you, why are you not accepting it? I'm telling you that you want broccoli. There's only so far you can go in that kind of conversation, because what can you do? You can't like take off your mind and like, here you go, here's all my memories. You've just got to kind of be like, well, if that's your standard for discourse, you can have that. I can't do anything more. Yeah.
Okay, Svez, and I'm not going to try to pronounce the rest of his name, but I know he's your good friend. Tell me his name.
I can't pronounce it either, but I'm laughing because I see the set, like, I don't even know if it's he or she. I think it's he in Russia, but comments on like other videos and stuff, and everyone has the same issue where they go Svez, and that's why I'm laughing. Like,
okay, yeah, I see him on your channel a lot. He says, Nathan, what do you want to do with your channel next, and where do you see it in a year?
I genuinely am not 100% sure. Like, I've got plenty of things planned, various interviews with philosophers, lots of open conversations, and some more bad apologetics. We want to do bad counter apologetics as well, and talk about ways that people approach counter apologetics that are counterproductive or like toxic and stuff like that. Also, because in the name of fairness and kind of good faith discussions, we should do that. next year, I think I'll probably be doing more in-person interviews with academics, with my camera that people have crowdfunded, and I'm also going to be doing street epistemology. So going out and setting up and basically having conversations with people out there in the world. And me and Harry, I don't know if Harry's watching, but we're going to go to a town when there's a Christian convention on that week and set up like a street epistemology stand and do that for a week and make like a little short documentary vlog style thing about all that as well. I don't know where exactly I see the channel in a year. I don't have these plans like, to be super like Jake Paul YouTuber or something like that. But I definitely appreciate the financial support, for example, that I get from people, or like the small amount I get from ad revenue, because it helps me do stuff like get a camera. So now I've got like more options of like the kind of things I can create, and that makes it all a bit more fun for me. But I don't know exactly where it's going now.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to finish with these last two questions. They don't have to be long, but what is most important to you in life?
I think I would say to love your neighbor as yourself, as cheesy as it sounds.
Cool. And what is your greatest hope?
Again, I'm gonna quote the Bible again. I'm gonna say for peace on earth and goodwill to all men. That would be my greatest hope. But I'm rather pessimistic about it, but it's still my greatest hope. Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, well, thank you everybody who has been here tonight. This has been really fun, and thank you so much, Nathan. I have really enjoyed this interview. This has been really great.
Well, yeah, I hope I've given you some good content and people have enjoyed listening. And I want to say thanks for the way that you've like engaged with me in general, because you've hopped on my channel and but you've always been like pleasant in the comments and stuff. You've engaged with me, even though we obviously disagree on a bunch of stuff. You've always been very nice. So I wanted to thank you for engaging that way, and also for inviting me on and interviewing me, because I enjoy, talking about this stuff. It's nice to be interviewed. So thank you.
Cool. And you know what? I love that you're thinking about important things. And that's what I love about your channel, is that, it has real substance. When I go on there, you guys are talking about deep things in life. And I respect that. Even if we have disagreements about stuff, I really appreciate that, you have a group of people on there who are deeply thinking about things. So. Awesome.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoy it as well. It's interesting to have a Christian fan from such a sort of different worldview to the one I'm coming at it from. So I really, really think that's cool.
Cool. All right, everybody. Thanks a lot. Go subscribe to Nathan, Digital Gnosis. Link is in the description. So, okay, good night.
Bye.